May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord. I think when we're going through the season of Lent, there is definitely an element of faith that plays a large role in getting through that time of trial. When we think about Jesus in the wilderness, and in particular when we think about Jesus going into Jerusalem and taking up that cross of knowing, I'm going to this place where they want to kill me and they're probably going to kill me, I think that there definitely is an element of faith that is involved in that. And that's the reason why we see this gospel compared to this story of Abraham, where God's like, Abraham or Abram, go into this wilderness and start up a kingdom even though you're already 100 years old. I promise you, you will be 1 billion. It was more like 800. And that you will do what needs to be done. So I do think that, sometimes it feels like God is calling us to do something that's more than we can handle. I can imagine that for Jesus, going into Jerusalem seemed kind of like, well, start up this kingdom from scratch. I know that you're kind of a wagoneer, you don't have a lot of resources, but you can do it. But I also think that there's an element here that's equally important. Where are our priorities when it comes to following that call of God? When God calls, are we going to listen to that voice of Peter, which is like, oh, I don't think you can do it. I don't know if you want to do it. It might cost too much to do it. Or are we willing to put ourselves out there and do what we believe is the right thing, even if it will cost us? I think that element of priority is what sits with me the most right now in this time where we are living through. Do we have our priorities in check in order to help us be good people in the world? As we examine ourselves during this time of Lent, are we also examining the things that we prioritize and value? What do we put first when it comes to following this call of God? Because what we see in this example from the gospel is Jesus is pretty much tested with what is it that he puts first? Your own life, or going into Jerusalem and showing people exactly what a person who is fully committed to God's love can do. Now, I don't want to give flack to Peter, because I think that one of the most interesting things about this gospel is we see through Peter and Christ an example of a person who has his priorities in order when it comes to God, and a person who is still trying to sort out his priorities when it comes to God. Peter is a disciple. He's learning. He's growing. Eventually, he'll get his priorities in check. And so he's not really doing anything wrong, even though Jesus is like, get behind me, Satan. What he's doing is he is expressing that fear, expressing that reluctancy that we all feel when we are called to do something that's a little bit bigger than what we think we can do. Sometimes it's like, I'm trying to think of a personal example. I can definitely tell you right now, going into a town meeting day and leading that as for the first time in my life, a part of me feels like, oh, can I do that? But then there's also the element of, well, where's your priorities? You signed up for this. You got to do it. But let's also be fair. That's not always something that everybody is called to do either. Sometimes our priorities can be as simple as, well, do I want to get up and vote during a town election? What good is that going to do? Should I participate? Maybe that's not a priority for us. Maybe it is. And it is worth getting up out of bed, going to a voting place, and participating in a town meeting. We have these things coming up, and sometimes in our life, we have these things that come up in our life sometimes where we have to ask ourselves, in our journeys with God, what is important? How is it important for us to share our love? Are we going to be prioritizing our children's sports games over our work? Are we going to be prioritizing the commitments that we make to our communities over ourselves? And we are not always going to come to the same answers. And sometimes that is okay. Sometimes it is okay for us to have different priorities and be called to different places than Jesus Christ was. And I have to say that the mistake of Lent sometimes is that we tell everybody to do the same thing and not to examine what those list of priorities should be specifically for you. But I do also want to point out another thing that I feel is very important. We can have bad priorities. And those bad priorities can lead us away from God. Not every voice that says it comes from God is of God. And not every voice that says it's good is good. I mean, I'm going to get a little political here, but I'm just a little. Tucker Carlson was in Russia. What was that about? You know, it definitely wasn't about saying how great the United States is. The United States has its problems, but we're in a time period where Russia is violently trying to take over another country. You go there, you give their leader softball questions, although understandably he probably could kill you. And you go to a supermarket and you're like, wow, look at this. You know, you can buy this for so much US dollars, keeping in mind that Russians can't buy this for that amount of money. Isn't Russia so much better than the United States? Where are the priorities there? Well, honestly, I feel Tucker Carlson has his priorities in order. He knows what he's trying to do. He's trying to sell an idea. But what about the rest of us? When Jesus was told his disciples, I'm going to Jerusalem, he knew where his priorities were. I'm going to share God's love in Jerusalem, no matter what it costs me. Peter came and said, don't do it. And he said that from a place of love. He didn't say, I'm Satan speaking this to you. He said, I love you, I don't want you to go. But Jesus was able to identify, even coming out of a place of love, that's not God speaking to me. Having our priorities in order helps us sort out how we can best be loving people in this world. But we also have to consciously choose to do that. And we have to have faith that putting our priorities in a way that helps us love and care for people is worth doing. And so this passage, if I was going to water it down, is very much a faith passage. Have faith that God's going to cover you through all the hard stuff. But I think there's a much deeper message to this. When we are going through this time of reflection during Lent, when we're deciding what are the things that are important to us, when we're deciding, well, where does my life go and where does the call go? Or when we're deciding, where does town meeting go and my personal time go? Or where do sports games go? You know, my daughter really wants me to be at that soccer game, but I have conflicting things. You know, how we live into that call of love matters based off of what we choose to put first. It's not my job to criticize or to tell you how you are to build up that house of love in your life. But it is, I think, the job of a fellow traveler trying to build up that house of love in their own life to point out that it's not always, building that house is not always the easiest thing, and sometimes it falls down, and that's okay. Christ is an example, and Christ's call sometimes feels like an extreme example. But when we know what it is we are doing, a single human life can do some amazing things, just like Christ did.